Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, you walk out into your backyard, and you realize that the birds in the trees, maybe your dog on the porch, or the deer at the edge of the woods, they could suddenly speak to you.
Right, and not just, mimicry or making sounds, but actual cognitive conversation.
Exactly, like you actually share a language with them. But then imagine that one afternoon, because of a terrible mistake you made, every single one of those animals goes permanently, violently silent.
It's a really haunting image.
It is. You try to speak to them and they just stare back at you, completely muted. And according to one of the oldest and most profound biblical traditions on earth, that is exactly what happened in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, we are so accustomed to the Sunday school version of this narrative. It's usually presented as a very simple, safe fable.
Right. Just a garden, a piece of fruit, and a villainous talking snake.
Exactly. But when we stick to that basic version, we completely miss the absolute cosmic tragedy of the original texts.
Which is exactly why we are here. Welcome to our deep dive. If you're joining us today, maybe you're intensely curious about biblical history, or maybe you're prepping for an academic discussion on ancient literature.
Or maybe you're just looking for a massive aha moment without all the overwhelming information overload.
Yeah, whatever brought you here, you are in the exact right place. Today, our mission is to examine arguably the most famous piece of literature in human history. We're talking about Genesis chapter 3, the universal narrative of the fall of man.
But, and this is crucial, we are actively stepping away from the familiar Western King James version of this story today.
Right, we're taking a totally different approach. We are going to look at this foundational narrative through the lens of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo canon.
And when we change that lens, the entire physics, the geography, and really the emotional weight of the story fundamentally shifts.
It totally does. And to do this, we've pulled together a really fascinating stack of sources for you. We're looking at comparative texts of Genesis 3 from the KJV alongside the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible.
Yeah, but the real heavy hitters today are the detailed excerpts from the Book of Jubilees.
Which is known as Kufali in the Ethiopian tradition, right?
Exactly, Kufal. As well as the apocalyptic visions from the Book of 1 Enoch.
So it's important to set the stage for you, the listener, right out of the gate. As we navigate these sources today, we are looking impartially at how these ancient texts function.
Right. We aren't here to debate historical or scientific claims. That's not the goal.
No, not at all. We are analyzing these texts as profound works of theology, ancient law, and a complete immersive worldview that shapes the daily lives of millions of people. We want to understand the why and the how behind the narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to talk about a snake or a piece of fruit, we have to establish the baseline.
Yeah, we have to understand what the world actually looked like before the fall. And the baseline in the Western tradition is wildly different from the baseline in the Ethiopian tradition.
It really is, starting with the very language the texts are translated from.
That is the crucial starting point, isn't it? If you grew up reading the King James Version, you are reading an English translation that relies heavily on the Masoretic text.
Right, and for those who might not know, the Masoretic text is the authoritative Hebrew and Aramaic text of the Jewish Bible. It was compiled by scholars known as the Masoretes between the 7th and 10th centuries.
And the linguistic tone of this text, especially when you read Genesis, it leans into a very legalistic framework.
Very legalistic. Reading the KJV almost feels like reading a clinical court transcript sometimes.
Totally. It's like a sovereign gave a strict command, the human subjects committed a trespass by breaking that command, and therefore a legal penalty of physical labor and banishment was handed down.
Right, it's a very simple equation. You did X, therefore the penalty is Y.
But the Ethiopian version of Genesis, which is known as Orit Zefetret, it does not pull from the Masoretic tradition at all, does it?
No, it doesn't. It follows the Septuagint, and the Septuagint is a much older ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. It was created in Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE.
Wow, so quite a bit older.
Yeah, and that Greek text then informed the ancient Ge'ez translation that is used in Ethiopia. Because of this totally different linguistic lineage, the emphasis shifts entirely.
How so?
Well, it is much less about a legal contract being violated. Instead, it heavily emphasizes a metaphysical catastrophe.
A metaphysical catastrophe? That sounds so much more intense.
It is. It focuses on the loss of divine light, the shattering of spiritual communion, and a literal, devastating change in the biological state of humanity.
And what blew my mind going through these sources is that the Ethiopian canon refuses to read Genesis 3 in a vacuum. It pairs it directly with the Book of Jubilees.
Yes, Jubilees is essential here.
And Jubilees comes in and just fills in all these massive chronological blank spaces that the KJV just ignores.
Yeah.
Like, in the Western tradition, we just assume Adam and Eve popped into existence on day 6 and immediately started hanging out in the garden together.
Right, like they just arrived simultaneously.
Mm.
But Jubilees gets highly, highly specific about the timeline of their entry into Eden.
The precision is just staggering to me. According to the Book of Jubilees, Adam and Eve were not brought into the Garden of Eden at the same time.
No, they weren't. Nor were they created inside of it, which is another common misconception.
Right. The text states that Adam was created outside the garden and brought into Eden after exactly 40 days.
Exactly 40 days.
But Eve, however, was brought into the garden after exactly 80 days. Let me stop you right there, because if you were listening to this with modern ears, hearing that the man gets in at 40 days and the woman has to wait 80 days sounds entirely arbitrary.
Oh, absolutely. It can sound arbitrary. Or worse, just inherently biased.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why double the time? What is the ancient mechanism or logic at play here?
It is a brilliant question. And it has nothing to do with arbitrary ancient bias, and literally everything to do with cosmic legal architecture.
Cosmic legal architecture. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, you have to look at how this event dictates later biblical law. Centuries later, in the book of Leviticus, God gives Moses the laws for ritual purification.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
If a woman gives birth to a male child, she undergoes a 40-day purification period before entering the sanctuary.
Oh, wow.
Right. And if she gives birth to a female child, it is an 80-day period.
Wait, so the ancient writers of Jubilees aren't just telling a story about a garden. They are literally reverse engineering the origins of human law.
They're establishing a theological blueprint. In the ancient mindset, ritual purity wasn't about being dirty in a hygienic sense. We often misunderstand that today.
Yeah, we think of it like needing a bath.
Exactly. But it was really about the heavy, mysterious transition between life and death, blood and creation. So Jubilees is explicitly tying the Levitical purification laws all the way back to the literal first days of human existence.
Because the sanctuary in Leviticus is basically a symbol of Eden, right?
Exactly. The sanctuary is a microcosm of Eden. So the time it takes a mother to be ready to enter the sanctuary perfectly mirrors the time it took the first male and female to be ready to enter the original sanctuary of Eden. It makes the law eternal.
That is fascinating. It turns this seemingly random detail into a load-bearing pillar of their entire religious structure.
It really does. It anchors the law in the very fabric of creation.
And the timeline specifics don't stop at their entry either. The KJV gives us absolutely no clue how long they lived in this paradise. I mean, it could have been 20 minutes, it could have been 10,000 years.
Right, it's completely open-ended in the KJV. But Jubilees puts a hard timer on it. It says they lived in the garden for exactly 7 years.
7 years. And the fall, the day everything collapsed, occurred precisely on the 17th day of the second month in the 8th year.
And again, we have to ask why that specific date matters. It's not just a random Tuesday.
Right, there's always a reason.
By dating the fall to the 17th day of the second month, Jubilees roots the event in a rigid liturgical calendar. For context, if you look later at the Genesis flood narrative, the catastrophic floodwaters begin to destroy the earth on the exact same calendar date.
The 17th day of the second month.
The exact same day.
Wow, so it's basically the official anniversary of cosmic disaster.
Yes, exactly. It completely removes it from the realm of a vague, once-upon-a-time fairy tale. It treats the fall as a historically documented, datable tragedy.
But the tragedy itself, the actual mechanism of what went wrong, is where I think these sources shine the brightest. It really comes down to their clothing.
Yes, the state of their physical bodies.
Because in the KJV, they eat the fruit, their eyes are opened, and they suddenly realize they are naked. Every piece of classic art depicts them hiding behind some bushes, suddenly embarrassed that they don't have pants on.
Right. We always interpret nakedness as the exposure of biological skin.
But the Ethiopian and broader Pauline traditions look at this entirely differently. Before the fall, they weren't physically bare humans. The sources say they were clothed in something called zij.
Yeah, zij. It's a Giz word that translates roughly to grace or light.
Grace or light. That completely changes the visual.
It does, and the theological weight of this concept is immense. In this tradition, Adam and Eve were not walking around with the exposed, vulnerable biological skin we have now. They were luminous.
Luminous, like literally glowing.
Literally. They were enveloped in a physical, radiating divine light. That radiant energy was their garment.
So they were essentially beings of pure high-frequency energy.
Exactly. So when the text says they ate the fruit, their eyes were open and they knew they were naked, it was not a sudden onset of anatomical prudishness.
Right, they weren't just suddenly shy.
No, the nakedness was the terrifying, instantaneous evaporation of this glowing, divine energy. The light literally went out.
I want to make sure I am visualizing this correctly because it radically changes the genre of the story. Reading the KJV, as we said, feels like a court transcript. You crossed a boundary line.
A legal violation.
Right. But reading this Ethiopian concept of Zegig feels like watching a tragic science fiction or high fantasy epic. You have these beings of pure radiating light. They make a choice to ingest this forbidden element, and the chemical reaction is a violent devolution.
That's a great way to put it.
They crash down from a high spiritual frequency into this heavy, dense, biological, meat and bones existence. The sudden darkness, the sudden feeling of gravity and cold on raw skin, it must have been visceral.
Devolution is the perfect word for it. They fall from a spiritual state down to a base material state.
It's just a terrifying thought.
But we have to remember, they were the pinnacle of this ecosystem. They were the stewards. So when the stewards devolve and crash into a heavy biological frequency, it sends a catastrophic shockwaves through the entire environment around them.
Which perfectly transitions us into the collateral damage of this event. Because the devolution of humanity triggered a massive, horrifying shift in the garden itself.
It wasn't just them who suffered.
No. In Jubilees, nature is not just a passive backdrop with some nice trees and a river. Nature is an active, communicative participant.
This is one of the most poignant and really heartbreaking differences found in the broader Ethiopian canon. We tend to view nature as something completely distinct from us.
Right. We are over here and nature's over there.
Exactly. But Jubilees 3.28 contains a startling revelation about the pre-fall world. It states explicitly that originally, all beasts, cattle, birds, and everything that walks or moves could speak to one another.
That is just wild.
The text says they all shared one lip and one tongue.
So my bizarre hypothetical at the beginning of the deep dive wasn't just a metaphor. The text literally claims that every animal had the capacity for cognitive verbal communication.
They absolutely did.
They could talk to humans and they could talk to each other.
Think about the theological implications of that. The ability of animals to speak was a specific divine grace tied directly to the uncorrupted purity of Eden.
Like it was a feature of the perfect world.
Right. It implies that true paradise is not just about having enough food or beautiful weather. It is about perfect, unobstructed communion between all living things. It was a true symphony of creation.
I have to pause here because this upends a massive assumption I've held my entire life. The whole traditional Sunday school story relies on the shock value of a magical, sinister, talking snake.
Yes, the talking serpent is always the centerpiece of the weirdness.
Right. If I'm a kid reading Genesis, I think, wow, a talking snake, that's supernatural. But if we applied Jubilees, I mean, if all animals could talk, does that mean the serpent wasn't some unique magical monster?
What is fascinating here is that the Ethiopian text following the Septuagint supports exactly that grounded interpretation.
Really? So it wasn't supernatural?
No. In the KJV, the serpent is introduced as being more subtle than any beast of the field. And subtle usually implies sneaky or deceitful. But the Ethiopian text translates this as the most cunning or wise of all the wild animals.
Oh, interesting. So it's about intellect.
Yes. It implies a high degree of natural intelligence, not supernatural sorcery.
So it was just a really smart animal that happened to weaponize a universal ability.
Precisely. The serpent wasn't an outlier because it could speak. It simply took a shared, beautiful faculty, this one lip of Eden, and perverted it.
It used the gift of communication to introduce doubt and philosophical friction.
Exactly.
I find that deeply unsettling. It's so much more chilling than a magical monster entering the garden. It means the corruption came from a neighbor.
A trusted neighbor, even.
Yeah, it was an inside job by a member of their own vocal community. And the consequence of that inside job is just devastating. The sources detail the exact moment of the expulsion, and the collateral damage is immediate.
It happens the very second they leave.
The instant Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden, the text says the mouths of all the beasts, cattle, and birds were stopped. The grace of speech was instantly withdrawn from the entire animal kingdom.
It is a profound cosmic injustice, if you look at it from the animal's perspective.
It really is. They didn't do anything wrong.
Exactly. The animals didn't eat the forbidden fruit. They didn't disobey the sovereign command. But because humanity, the appointed stewards of the garden, fell, The environment itself suffered the consequence.
The animals are suddenly locked in a prison of silence.
The symphony just abruptly stops. You go from a vibrant, communicative ecosystem where you can understand the birds and the cattle to a world of sudden, animalistic silence.
Just grunts, roars, and chirps instead of language.
And this raises an incredibly important question for you, the listener, regarding how ancient texts shape modern worldviews.
I think about this all the time.
If you belong to a tradition that genuinely believes animals once shared one lip with us, and that they lost their voice directly because of human disobedience, how does that change your relationship to the environment?
Oh, it changes everything. It completely reframes the concept of human dominion over the earth.
Right, it's not a license to exploit.
No, it's not a dictatorship where we get to do whatever we want to dumb beasts.
Yeah.
We owe them. Our ancestors' choice cost them their voices.
Yes, it instills this deep, sorrowful responsibility.
Caring for the earth isn't just about resource management. It's an ongoing apology tour to an environment that we silenced.
An apology tour, that's a very powerful way to frame it. And that shared loss, that friction between humanity and the silent world around them, is the immediate context for the specific pronouncements God makes right after the fall.
Right, the things we often call the curses.
Yes, but the linguistic differences between the KJV and the Ethiopian texts reveal entirely different understandings of what these curses actually mean for the future of humanity.
Let's dig into the anatomy of these curses, starting with the very first one directed at the serpent. Theologians often call Genesis 3.15 the proto-evangelium.
Which basically just means the first gospel or the first hint of a future redeemer.
Exactly. God is laying out the future relationship between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring.
In the KJV, the phrase is iconic. God says to the serpent regarding the human seed, "It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel."
Now, when I hear the word bruise, I picture a physical blow. The KJV framing sounds like a definitive knockout punch.
A decisive victory.
Right. It reads like a prophecy of a great boxing match at the end of time, where the human champion steps into the ring and eventually lands a crushing final blow to the head of evil, even though he gets his heel stepped on in the process.
But the Ethiopian tradition, utilizing the Septuagint, uses a remarkably different verb. It doesn't talk about bruising at all.
What does it say?
It says, "He shall watch for your head," or "He shall lie in wait for your head, and you shall watch for his heel."
Wow. This is one of my favorite distinctions in the entire stack of sources. If the KJV is a definitive boxing match, the Ethiopian version frames human existence as a tense, never-ending Cold War.
Yes, a Cold War is a great analogy.
Lie and wait for, watch for. It implies a perpetual state of exhausting vigilance.
It fundamentally alters the psychology of the believer. It tells you that evil is not just a defeated foe waiting for a final knockout. It is an active, lurking predator in the tall grass.
You always have to watch your heel.
You always have to be looking down, paranoid, waiting for the snake to strike, and simultaneously, you are constantly scanning for the opportunity to strike its head.
It defines the human condition as one of constant spiritual alertness and survival, and that brutal state of survival instantly begins to warp human relationships, starting with the very first couple.
It does. The harmony is broken on every level.
If we look at the curse pronounced on the woman, the KJV says God will multiply her sorrow and conception, but the Ethiopian text is vastly more visceral. It says God will multiply her pains and groanings.
The KJV's use of sorrow often focuses theologians on the emotional toll, the abstract sadness of bringing life into a fallen world.
Right, like a general melancholic state.
But the Ethiopian text forces the reader to confront the agonizing, physical biology of childbirth. It grounds the punishment in the heavy meat and bones existence they have just devolved into.
The biological processes of this new density are going to hurt.
They're going to hurt a lot.
But the truly controversial part of this curse, the part that has shaped human history for millennia, is the power dynamic it introduces.
This is a very sensitive and important text to unpack carefully.
Both texts state something to the effect of, the woman's desire will be for her husband, and he shall rule over her. Now, for centuries, people have taken that KJV phrasing and used it to justify strict patriarchal hierarchies.
They have, arguing that male dominance is God's explicit design.
Exactly. But this is where reading through a specific canonical lens is absolutely vital.
Yes, in the Ethiopian tradition, this phrase, "He shall rule over thee," is emphatically not interpreted as God's ideal prescriptive design for human relationships.
So how do they view it? If it's not the design, what is it?
They view it as a tragic symptom of the broken harmony. Think about their state before the fall. They were beings of light, sharing a symphony with nature, standing as equal partners in grace.
Right, total equality.
So the shift to a hierarchy, where one human exercises dominion or rule over another human, is a direct consequence of the curse. It is the friction of a broken world. Hierarchy is a description of the disease, not the cure.
That is a massive paradigm shift. The hierarchy is the curse. It's the entropy of human relationships.
Exactly. It's a symptom of the fall, not the blueprint of Eden.
Yet, even in the middle of this dark, heavy curse of pain and subjugation, there is this incredible, defiant beacon of hope. Adam names his wife. In the KJV, he names her Eve. But the Ethiopian text explicitly translates the meaning of the name for the reader. He names her Zewet.
Zewet, which literally means life.
And if we cross-reference this back to the Book of Jubilees, this naming ceremony is celebrated profoundly.
It is a moment of immense theological triumph. Despite the terrifying introduction of death, and despite the new reality of agonizing childbirth, she is named life because she is recognized as the ultimate vessel.
The conduit through which the seed, the ultimate Messiah, will eventually come to break this very curse.
Yes, her role is elevated from a co-conspirator in the fall to the mother of all living, and the gateway to ultimate redemption.
So the woman's curse is deeply tied to the agonizing process of bringing forth life into a dying world. The man's curse, on the other hand, shifts the focus entirely to the earth itself, the dirt.
The ground they stand on.
The KJV says, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake." But the Ethiopian version renders this with a subtle but important difference. Cursed is the ground in your labors.
The difference is nuanced, but philosophically heavy. Curse for thy sake can imply that the earth itself was magically made intrinsically evil, or that God made the dirt vindictive just to punish Adam.
Like the dirt itself is out to get him.
Right. But cursed in your labors implies something much more scientific, almost akin to the introduction of entropy.
Meaning the earth isn't evil, it just stops cooperating.
Exactly. The environment simply resists. It is no longer a willing, harmonious participant that yields fruit effortlessly. The ground now requires extreme, exhausting struggle.
Work transitions from being a joyful, creative stewardship of a cooperative garden to a brutal daily fight against thorns and thistles.
The sweat of the face.
Yeah, you are locked in a cage match with the dirt for your bread until the day the dirt finally wins and reclaims you as dust.
It is incredibly bleak.
It is. But right in the middle of this bleakness, God does something that completely bridges their past state of light and their future state of dirt. Genesis 3.21 says God made them coats of skins.
And the interpretation of this act varies wildly depending on your tradition. The KJV perspective often views this very practically. God is acting as a tailor to cover their new sense of shame.
Or I've heard Western theologians view it symbolically as the first animal sacrifice. The idea that blood had to be shed to cover sin.
Yes, the substitutionary atonement model.
Yeah.
But the Ethiopian perspective ties this directly back to the concept of zij, the garment of light we discussed earlier.
How does skin replace light? What is the mechanism there?
In the Ethiopian view, God making these coats of skins represents the final, divinely ordained thickening of their human nature.
Thickening.
Yes, they had lost the radiating light, they were vulnerable to the harsh new physics of the world, and now God permanently clothes them in heavy, biological, mortal flesh. The skin itself is the marker of the curse of heaviness.
Wow. So it's the physical proof that they devolve?
Yes. However, and this is crucial to the theology, it is simultaneously a profound act of mercy.
Mercy, because they needed it to survive.
Exactly. God clothed them. He provided the exact biological apparatus they would need to survive in a world of thorns, sweat, and winter. It is the ultimate sign that despite the curses, despite the devolution, they were not abandoned by their creator.
He's basically giving them the heavy survival gear they need for the hostile new reality they created.
That's a perfect analogy.
They are biologically dense, they have to sweat for their food, the animals are staring at them in silence, and they are locked in a perpetual cold war with evil. The Garden of Light is no longer a hospitable environment for heavy creatures of skin. It's time to leave.
Which brings us to the actual expulsion and the completely hidden geography of paradise.
Yeah, Adam and Eve must now leave this domain. But the way they leave and where they go differs massively between the traditions, and it literally redefines the map of the world for the believer.
It's a geographical earthquake.
In the standard Western reading I grew up with, the expulsion is a fairly abrupt eviction. God drives them out, puts an angel with a sword at the gate, and that's the end of the chapter. Close the book.
Right, they're just kicked out.
But the Book of Jubilees provides a deeply moving, highly ritualized exit scene.
It is a moment of profound grief. Jubilees tells us that Adam doesn't just put his head down and walk out into the dirt in silence.
What does he do?
As he is leaving, at the exact rising of the sun, he stops and offers a sweet-smelling sacrifice to God. The text specifically lists the ingredients: frankincense, galbanum, and stactate.
I want to linger on this because it broke my heart when I read it in the sources. Why these specific spices?
Because those are the exact ingredients of the holy incense that will later be used in the tabernacle and the temple. Adam is burning incense, creating a pillar of fragrant smoke as a final act of devotion.
That's beautiful.
And Jubilees notes that he is actively mourning the loss of two specific things: the voice of God and the company of angels.
He is stepping out of a realm of pure divine communication into a world of animalistic silence and back-breaking toil. And by burning that incense, he is desperately trying to take one last sensory experience of heaven, the smell of the garden, out into the dirt with him.
Yes, holding on to that memory. And the text says they were cast out to dwell over against, meaning opposite the garden of pleasure.
And this is where the two traditions completely diverge on a geographic level.
Yeah.
The million-dollar question: where is Eden now?
If you ask a Western theologian reading the KJV, the answer is usually that Eden was a historical, physical place on the map, perhaps somewhere in Mesopotamia that is fundamentally gone.
Right, wiped out.
Exactly, likely wiped off the face of the earth by the great flood in Noah's time. In this view, the tree of life is completely gone from the earth, and it only returns in the apocalyptic future, coming down from heaven in the book of Revelation. Eden is a closed chapter of ancient history.
But the Ethiopian Orthodox perspective says, no, wait, you're looking at it wrong. It is still here.
Yes, the Ethiopian tradition holds that Eden, known as Genet, still exists on earth right now.
Right now, like physically here.
Yes. It was not destroyed by the floodwaters. It is simply veiled. It exists in a hidden, higher dimension, or a secluded, unapproachable geographic space on this earth, concealed by God's direct command.
Here is where the mythology gets incredibly rich. Because to keep heavy biological humanity out of this veiled reality, God sets up a guard system. The KJV simply says God placed cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the tree of life.
Right. And as a kid, you picture a guy with wings holding a physical weapon made of fire, like a medieval knight.
Totally, a literal bouncer with a fire sword. But the Ethiopian view is much more mystical and dimensional.
In the Jubilees tradition, the flaming sword is not a physical weapon held in a hand. It is understood as a living spiritual barrier.
A barrier.
It is a dimensional lock, a wall of consuming spiritual fire that dense biological matter cannot pass through.
Wow. And the cherubim.
And the cherubim are not just bouncers at a physical gate. They are the keepers of the holy. They actively maintain the boundary between the fallen, entropic world of decay and the preserved, perfect reality of paradise.
And what exactly are they guarding? We know it's the tree of life. But the KBC doesn't really describe the tree, it just names it.
It leaves it completely to the imagination.
However, the Ethiopian canon includes the Book of 1 Enoch, which contains visionary apocalyptic literature, and chapters 24 and 25 of 1 Enoch give us an incredibly vivid sensory description of this tree.
Enoch's vision is just breathtaking. Enoch describes a tree that defies the physics of our fallen world. He says its fragrance is beyond all earthly fragrances.
Which ties beautifully back to Adam mourning the loss of the garden's scent with the incense.
Exactly. The scent of the tree is the scent of heaven, and its leaves, its blooms, and its wood never wither. This is a direct contrast to the entropy and decay introduced into the rest of the world.
It's untouched by death.
Yes. Its fruit is described as unimaginably beautiful, resembling the clusters of a palm tree.
But there is a strict, terrifying restriction placed on it, right?
Yes. Enoch is told by the archangel Michael that no mortal is permitted to touch this tree until the time of the great judgment. It is completely off limits to our heavy, biological, entropic hands.
If we touch it in our fallen state, the paradox would destroy us.
Exactly. Light and dense matter cannot mix in that way.
And yet, and this is where the geography becomes truly spectacular, despite being off limits and veiled by a flaming dimensional barrier, this hidden Eden is not disconnected from our world. It actively sustains it.
It's the engine of life. And this is seen most profoundly in the geography of the rivers.
Yes, the river connection. The sources highlight this deeply held geographical belief in the Ethiopian tradition that the physical Nile River, known scripturally as the Gihon, actually originates from the base of the Tree of Life inside this hidden Eden.
Think of the mechanics of that. The belief is that the water flows out from the roots of the immortal tree, travels under the earth, passes safely beneath the spiritual barrier of the flaming sword, and emerges into the physical, fallen world.
To sustain biological life in Ethiopia and Egypt.
Yes, to literally water the earth.
It connects the holiest, most inaccessible object in all of creation directly to the daily, muddy, life-giving waters of the physical world. The water you drink, the water that irrigates the crops that you have to farm by the sweat of your face, is ultimately sourced from the very paradise you were exiled from.
It is a profound theological paradox. You are exiled from the garden, but you are kept alive by the runoff of the garden.
I have to ask you, if you are a believer in this tradition, and you walk outside tomorrow morning believing that paradise is physically veiled somewhere on this exact planet and that it is actively watering your crops through the Nile, how does that change your everyday psychology?
It's a total paradigm shift.
How does that compare to viewing Eden as just a destroyed myth from a bygone era?
It changes your entire orientation to reality. It means the sacred is not gone. It is just separated from you by a veil of your own making.
It's just out of reach.
It means the earth is not just a dead rock spinning in a cold vacuum, but a living canvas that holds a hidden, pulsating center of divine life. It creates a worldview steeped in longing, deep reverence, and a constant, palpable connection to the divine source.
That's incredibly beautiful.
You realize that physically and spiritually you are living downstream from grace.
Downstream from grace. That is a stunning way to put it. And that deep, visceral longing to reconnect with that source, to swim upstream, isn't just an abstract poetic feeling for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It dictates how millions of people live out their daily physical lives.
It's highly practical theology.
Because Eden is viewed as an existing, veiled reality that sustains the world right now, the Church has built its entire daily practice around trying to conceptually and physically return there.
And to understand how they do this, we have to summarize the great reversal that occurred in Genesis 3. We've mapped out the devastation.
Right. Humanity went from glowing immortality to dense skin returning to dust. They went from effortless provision to fighting thorns with the sweat of their face.
They went from walking in open communion with God and angels to hiding in terror.
Yeah.
And the environment went from a speaking, harmonious symphony to absolute tragic silence.
It's a total cascading systems failure. So how does a believer operate inside a failed system? They try to hack the system to reverse the effects.
Hacking the system is an incredibly apt way to describe the intense Ethiopian practice of fasting.
Oh, really? Tell me about the fasting.
In the West, fasting is often viewed as a mental exercise, just feeling hungry to show God you were devoted.
Right, like giving up chocolate for Lent or something.
Exactly. But in this tradition, fasting is fundamentally an attempt to reverse the biological curses of the fall.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How does skipping a meal reverse a cosmic curse?
Remember that the curse was a thickening of nature. The heavy coats of skins, the reliance on biological digestion, the need to consume to survive. By intentionally denying the desires of the flesh, specifically heavy foods, meat, dairy, but also worldly toil and comfort, believers are symbolically and physically trying to starve the heavy fallen biology.
Oh,
They are trying to work their way back toward Adam's pre-fall state of luminous independence from the dirt. They're trying to shed the heaviness of those skin garments and return to a state of spiritual lightness.
you deny the heavy biological needs to awaken the dormant spiritual light. It's basically a bodily rebellion against the curse of the flesh.
That's exactly it.
You're telling your body, I wasn't originally made to need this.
Precisely. And this rebellion, this journey back to Eden, isn't just a private individual pursuit through fasting. It is the central, explosive drama of their communal worship.
Which brings us to the liturgy.
The Ethiopian Orthodox Mass, known as the Kaides, is literally architecturally and liturgically designed to recreate Eden.
So the architecture of the faith is literally a map of the garden. The sanctuary of the church is viewed as a type or a symbolic replica of the Garden of Eden. When you step into the church, you are conceptually stepping onto the perimeter of the veiled reality.
And at the absolute center of that sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies, is the tablet. The tablet is the replica of the Ark of the Covenant, which is central to Ethiopian Christianity.
Right, they claim to hold the original Ark in Aksum.
Yes. But theologically, within the liturgy, the tablet is directly identified with the Tree of Life.
And this is where the theology gets incredibly profound, wrapping up all the threads we've discussed today. You have the cherubim and the flaming sword guarding the tree of life in the hidden Eden, completely blocking dense biological humans from touching it.
Yes.
But in the liturgy, the Eucharist, the communion bread and wine representing the body and blood of Christ, is consecrated directly upon the tablet.
Exactly. So taking the Eucharist is conceptually bypassing the flaming sword.
It is like having a spiritual VIP access badge that lets you walk right past the bouncers guarding the VIP room of reality.
That's a fun way to phrase it, but yes, it is humanity, redeemed through the ultimate seed, finally being allowed past the cherubim to eat from the tree of life once again.
The forbidden fruit of Genesis that brought biological death and heaviness is replaced by the Eucharistic fruit that brings eternal life and lightness. The closed, guarded door of Genesis 3 is dramatically reopened in the Quaetus.
And we see this theme of ultimate restoration play out in their baptismal rites as well, tying back to our very first point about clothing.
Baptizim in a garment of light.
Yes, when a person is baptized in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, they are given specific white robes to wear.
And these aren't just generic symbols of being washed clean from sin, are they?
No, they represent the deliberate putting back on of the lost garment of glory, the zine.
It is the restoration of the light that was violently extinguished when Adam and Eve fell into biological heaviness. They are putting the light bulbs back in. So what does this all mean? We have covered an immense amount of ground today, completely deconstructing a story you probably thought you knew by heart.
We started by looking at how a text focused on clinical, legal trespass in the KJV contrasts with a multidimensional sci-fi tragedy of lost light in the Ethiopian tradition.
We uncovered the terrifying sudden silence of the animals losing their shared one lip, and how that demands an apology tour of ecological stewardship. We redefined the curses not just as arbitrary punishments, but as a perpetual Cold War with an active predator, a tragic shift into hierarchy as a disease, and the introduction of biological heaviness and earthly entropy.
And perhaps most beautifully, we discovered a veiled, breathing Eden that still exists, actively watering the earth from the immortal roots of a fragrant tree, and how millions of believers use fasting and liturgy to hack their way back to that state of light.
It is an unbelievably profound journey, and I think it underscores the immense, irreplaceable value of reading ancient texts through multiple cultural and canonical lenses. If you just stick to the two-dimensional felt board of your childhood, you miss the universe.
It expands a simple tale of a snake and an apple into a sweeping cosmic tragedy about environmental harmony, spiritual frequency, and a silenced earth desperately longing for its voice. It makes the human story infinitely richer.
It really does. But as we wrap up this deep dive, analyzing the sweat of the face and the thorns introduced by the curse, it leaves me with a very strange thought about how we live today.
I think I know where you're going with this. Consider the modern world we have built for ourselves. If endless labor, the struggle for survival, the heavy burden of physical toil, and the absolute resistance of the earth were the direct tragic consequences of the fall.
How much of modern human technological progress is really just humanity's subconscious, desperate attempt to rebuild Eden?
It is a profound question. Think about our constant, relentless drive for automation, our obsession with artificial intelligence, our absolute addiction to effortless, one-click convenience. How much of that is really just us trying to escape the sweat of the face?
Are we just using microchips, algorithms, and automated delivery drones to try and reclaim a paradise we can't quite remember? We are literally trying to build our own automated tree of life so we never have to fight the thorns in the dirt ever again. We are trying to code our way out of the ancient curse.
And the question remains whether our technology will lead us back to the light or just wrap us in an even heavier coat of skins.
That is the thought to keep you up at night. Thank you all so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. We hope you walk away from this with a completely shattered and rebuilt perspective on a foundational narrative. Keep questioning the basics, keep looking at the sources around you through different challenging lenses, and remember, the world is always, always more complex than the simple two-dimensional pictures we've been handed.
Until next time, keep exploring the hidden depths.
And maybe, just maybe, listen a little closer to the silence of the animals in your backyard. We'll see you next time.